Welcome back to another episode of Foolproof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I'm your host. It's great to be with you. We're going to talk with Ron Dodson about all things Iran, or Iran if you're educated, and Israel going on in the news and how Christians need to think clearly. I wrote a Substack on this topic earlier this week, and I wanted to have Ron on because I like to have Ron on to talk about geopolitical things, finance things. He's a man of many talents, a Renaissance man. And so we're going to have a great conversation, elicit some good questions. Before we get into that, I wanted to make sure you knew about a couple things coming up. First, we have our conference, men's conference at the Well Church called Burn the Ships. You can go to boulderwell.org/burntheships to learn more about that. I'd love for as many of my listeners to be there as possible. It's going to be August 1st and 2nd here in beautiful Boulder, Colorado. Don't believe what the haters say. Yes, many, many liberals abound, but it is a beautiful place that belongs to King Jesus. We'd love to have you join us at our beautiful church building located at 300 South Broadway, August 1st and 2nd. We're going to have Michael Clary, Michael Foster, Doug Ponder out to speak and help us grow as men. So you can go to boulderwell.org/burntheships. Get your ticket today before they sell out. Also wanted to remind you of a great product I use called Farmer Bill Provisions. This is biltong. It's not beef jerky. It is better for you. It has less ingredients, all the weird ingredients you might see in a beef jerky at a gas station. Farmer Bill does not do that. And so you can order these at his website, farmerbill.com. Use code FOOLPROOF to get 20% off your first order. Foolproof, that's FULLPROOF, to get 20% off your first order. FarmerBillsProvisions.com is where you need to go. This is a great way to supplement your protein intake, to get that protein. I'm trying to get 200 grams of protein a day, which is incredibly challenging if you don't know, to actually do that and stay on track. And so this is a great way to get a very easy way to get protein in your diet. I also wanted to let you know about Legacy Profits Club. This is a great way to become independent in terms of your finances. If you wanted to get into stocks and trades, but you have nothing in terms of knowledge, like myself, Legacy Profits Club is here to help. If you use my link in the show notes, you can go sign up today. You can get lessons, education. You can avoid all the downsides of trading in the stock market, which typically comes with great loss because you have no idea what you're doing. Well, Derek over at Legacy Profits Club is here to help. Sign up today, and he will get you on your way to trading. He releases content almost every week, almost every day, in fact, to help you become a better trader. Click the link in the show notes. I also want to make sure my listeners knew that I am moving a lot of my content over to Substack. I'm writing at least once a week there. I'd love for you to sign up as a subscriber to help me get started there. I've already got almost 200 subscribers on the Substack, and I'll have a couple articles getting republished over at the Center for Baptist Leadership, the Blaze, and the Federalist, which is great. And so I'm going to keep putting work in there. So make sure you go check out the Substack. All right, let's get into today's episode with Ron Dodson. Welcome back to another episode of Foolproof Theology. We're going to have a great conversation today about some geopolitical issues going on in our world. I wrote recently in my Substack on Israel, Iran, and dispensationalism. And there's a lot of conversations when we hear the name Israel in the news. Christians get very confused because there's been a saturation, you might say, of dispensational theology and the centrality of Israel in kind of ushering in the end times and the return of Jesus Christ, which we all pray for, we want for, we long for. You'll hear Christians use words like Maranatha in both fundamentalist and charismatic backgrounds. But when Israel gets mentioned, Christians often feel duped. In fact, there's a conversation going on right now. I think it's out with Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz that I find very interesting, very fun, because Ted Cruz talks about how he mentions a verse from Genesis where, we need to bless Israel so that we will be blessed and not curse Israel. And Tucker asks him about this. And I thought Tucker did a great job. He said, I am a Christian, and I just want to know the reference for this and how you understand the nation state of Israel today. And Ted couldn't do a good job of that. The reason I wanted to have this conversation on the podcast is because obviously I wrote on the Substack. It's a hot topic. Also, I wanted to help Christians understand that we're framing this conversation in geopolitical terms more than theological terms. So theology may come up in our conversation today. Theology may be mentioned. Of course, as Christians, we believe that the worship of God and enjoying God and advancing his mission in the world and the kingdom of God in the world is of chief importance. But when we talk about geopolitical issues, it's easy to talk about, well, it's easier, I think, to talk about like Taiwan and China. But often when Israel gets mentioned, we all of a sudden get very like jumpy. And I don't think we need to do that. And so today on the show, I'm going to have a returning guest, Ron Dodson. Ron has come on the show before to talk about tariffs. And so anytime something big comes up like this, I like Ron's perspective. I enjoy it. Sometimes I disagree with it. And so we may get into some of that in the show today. But Ron, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
I'm glad to be here, Chase. What, disagree? I didn't think we disagree.
We're gonna
No,
find
that's
out.
awesome.
We're gonna find
That's
out.
awesome. It's something that that I think is sorely lacking, even in the family of Christians, is the ability to, like adults, disagree, argue, even full-throated argument, and then hug it out and realize, hey, we're rowing the boat the same direction. We serve the same king. But without these critical arguments, how are we supposed to grow and mature as the body of Christ? And I think it's hugely important. I mean, I can look back in every decade of my life, I've had some big aha about the Lord, not in basic terms, not Trinitarian, not Nicene Christianity, not the basics, but some part that really helps me mature in my understanding. And that's only natural. We expect, our kids to mature. We expect people to mature in their jobs. Wouldn't it make sense for the body of Christ to mature as well? And that's one thing we can lock arms in a certain sense with the dispensationalists who have throughout their time, said, hey, the Bible is true and there's this progression of revelation. We disagree with how they would see that in some very critical areas, but we can applaud their efforts to take the Bible seriously and say, hey, we as the body of Christ should mature. So we're coming at this hopefully from a gracious point of view.
Amen. Amen, brother. And that's hopefully what many people read my article in Substack that way. But dispensationalists, they tend to get, very locked in on this stuff. And
Yeah.
it becomes kind of a totalizing, universalizing thing when people hear the nation of Israel. So you wrote a thread on X about kind of what's going on. And for those who are unfamiliar, maybe you're listening years in the future, or you just have not been able to get on social media or stay up to date. Israel launched a preemptive attack against the nation of Iran to take out key sites of industry, particularly related to their ability to develop nuclear arms, has been the kind of auspice that's been floated out there. Iran or Iran, I really don't know how to pronounce it because it's a foreign country, but I'm going to keep mixing it up on the episode.
Just go with the flock of seagulls. Iran.
They've retaliated with missiles. There's been videos out of Tel Aviv with some destruction, and speaking from just an admirer of various aspects of warfare, it's been interesting to see some of these intercontinental ballistic missiles have been intercepted by their defense system in like space, and to see those explosions happen in space has been really really wild to watch. I mean, just the technology that we have today and how space itself has become a domain of, defense. It's been incredible. But Israel is defending itself after it attacked Iran. And so now there's a big debate on what the U.S. involvement is, and if we should get involved. And Trump has kind of led on a platform that, on the one hand, we want no more foreign wars, no more endless wars. He's been very anti that. And I think that has been part of his base, the MAGA base. And yet at the same time, he's also in the past said that we don't want a nuclear armed Iran. Iran is a country famous for saying death to America, death to the West. They want to wipe out Israel, all this kind of stuff. And so, we have kind of three chief adversaries, at least that's how the Americans have been taught to believe: North Korea, China, and Iran. And Ron offers some unique perspectives. So, Ron, you mentioned that Iran has in the past disavowed their interest in kind of developing nuclear arms. They're just looking to develop nuclear energy. Is that right? So maybe share some of that with the audience.
Well, let's start. First of all, you mentioned intercontinental ballistic missiles. It's medium range ballistic missiles that are in play here. Intercontinental is a much more complicated, bigger, harder to execute kind of thing. These are two stage plus a reentry vehicle as opposed to three-stage intercontinental. Anyway, just saying that in case anybody says, you can't listen to Chase. Chase knows what he's talking about. But and then the space, the cool thing you were mentioning, it's in a grotesque way beautiful, some of these shots. But the THAAD system, it's either our THAAD system, which is our high altitude terminal high altitude uh, aerial defense, hits these before they go into their terminal stage. So you get these things intercepted in space. Those things are, and it's either our THAAD system or the Israeli version of that. That hasn't been released. That's I think still classified, but those are $14 million a shot. So
Jeez.
the cost of this whole imbroglio is staggering already. So anyway, you mentioned, what about Iran? So um, Iran had a monarch back in the day, and our CIA in the 50s, because, and we can go back and forth. Was it because of we wanted a strategic foothold against the Soviets? Did we want the oil? For whatever reason, the CIA participated in overthrowing that monarchy and in installing the Shah. Now, let me say, the Shah was way better than the Ayatollah regime that we've had since 1978. That being said, the Shah was not fun to live under for the for this was not a as a lot of people like to talk about, a classically liberal regime. This was
Right.
a repressive regime. Again, I'd go back to the Shah in a heartbeat. Compared to the Shah, was a very erudite, very smart guy. He ended up being about ready to die. He was suffering from cancer in the mid 70s. Carter wasn't real crazy about him, and Carter was a liberal, and I mean not just what we think of as a left liberal, but a philosophical liberal. So he had problems with the Shah, didn't support him. You get the Iranian Revolution. The Shah, we protect the Shah, but we didn't protect the regime of the Shah very well. You get this Iranian Revolution, and now you have this reign of the Ayatollahs and then a chief of state, kind of a strange arrangement, but very much in practice, a theocracy. I mean, all regimes are some level of theocracy. These are just very hardcore Shiite theocracy, as
Right.
opposed to a materialist liberal theocracy, which is what we kind of live under. That's another podcast. So anyway, they ever we put massive, the Iranians had this revolution. The Ayatollah Khomeini came to power, and they took a bunch of this was the Iranian hostage crisis. Maybe you've read about back in the day, during the last days of Jimmy Carter's administration, and Carter set up an attempt to rescue these guys using, this was what Delta Force was brought together for originally, the kind of the Army equivalent of SEAL team of DevGru, what is colloquially called SEAL Team 6. There's actually not a SEAL Team 6. It's the Operational Development Group, but let's call it SEAL Team 6. That's what everybody thinks of. That's actually from Disney, if I remember correctly. Disney came up with SEAL Team 6. Anyway, Delta goes in. It's a disaster, doesn't work. But Reagan is elected. Reagan has some very harsh words for Iran, and the hostages are released, I think coinciding with his inauguration, if I remember correctly. I was in 8th grade, so forgive me. And then, but we hit them with just an increasing sanction regime since then. So the Iranian Iran has a lot of oil. It's heavy crude oil. It's not light sweet crude you've heard of that Texas, for instance, produces. It's not even as easily refinable as Brent North Sea crude. It's very heavy in higher distillates. Automobile gas is refined to mostly around octane, so there's 8 carbon atoms. A lot of the Iranian oil is much heavier in the chain, so you get towards like Vaseline, viscosity kind of stuff, which is much higher carbon chain. And so they suffered because of these sanctions. It's very hard to refine that, and they needed Western help. They didn't get it, so the Iranian economy has suffered. Although they've done okay. The Persians are a gifted people and have been. This is one of the world's oldest civilizations. It was the Persians who sponsored the return of the Israelites to Judea in order to rebuild the temple. This was in the days of Xerxes and Darius and those guys. You can read about that. Prophesied by Ezekiel, came to fruition. Under Esther, Zerubbabel, that part of your scripture, you can read about that, and it's cool. It's great stuff. The Persians are a long-serving, a long-standing civilization. Originally, some form probably of Zoroastrianism, which seems to be a Noahic covenant Gentile. They what the Hebrews called Yahweh, they called Mazda. But then it was overtaken by Islam later. And so in the Shia version of Islam in the 700s and 800s. So anyway, their religious leadership since then has said nuclear weapons are against our Shia understanding of what Islam is supposed to be, this religion of peace. Now, we can, as Christians, would argue with what their version of peace is, but they have said, look, but we do want nuclear power. Our oil is very heavy. It needs to be refined. We're not going to do fuel oil here because that's messy and ugly and dirty. We want nuclear, just like the rest of that part of the world has had, pioneered by France and then Germany, although Germany has since given up their nuclear power and they've suffered for it. Nuclear power is very clean. But they said, hey, look, we will accept inspections and we will take an inspection regime to make sure that we don't want a nuclear weapon, but we do want nuclear power. And we need to refine the nuclear material that is on our land. Iran is rich in minerals, but to do so, you're going to have to remove these sanctions. And since really only I hate to say this because it kills me to say this, but only Barack Obama has been aggressive in pursuing this. And it was the one part of Obama's foreign policy that I thought was very, very smart. But the Israelis have always been against. Well, that's not true. They haven't always been against it. In the 30 years since Bibi Netanyahu has come to power, they have been fully against it. And the problem with Netanyahu is he has one, he kind of has a hammer and sees every problem as a nail. The problem is his hammer approach to his neighbors has done nothing to make his situation any better, and it has increased the suffering of the Middle East a millionfold, but it has also led to chaos and made foreign policy for the United States incredibly difficult. Let's just go through. Look at the last deal, Syria. Now Turkey has much greater influence over Syria, and it's ruled by what amounts to ISIS, former ISIS operatives, the Druze and the other minority ethnic groups are in a terrible state there in former Syria. But Netanyahu hated Assad, who ruled there, but there was peace in Syria. So the question is, look, are we going to agree 100% with any of these people, or do you want? It's a very messy deal. So anyway, Syria was the last hammer that Netanyahu used, and I would argue it's worse now than it was then. I think it's worse even for Israel, although they did take Mount Haran, and we'll see if they're able to keep that. Before Operation Odyssey Dawn, they supported the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi, and everybody goes, "Well, who doesn't want who didn't want the overthrow of Gaddafi?" Well, let's just look in the 12, 13 years since that has happened. Libya has been utter chaos, incredible suffering, huge recruitment for radical Islamist groups. It's a disaster. Let's look at Mubarak, Hosni. Pardon me if I'm saying his name wrong, but the military leader in Egypt forever. Netanyahu and we looked the other way, and during the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt now can't feed itself. It survives on our foreign aid that is ostensibly military, but they use that money. Money's fungible, and they use that money to buy grain from Russia. And they can't feed their people without that aid, and it's gotten worse since that overthrow. So continually look at, and the greatest example was Iraq, the disaster of us going back in there. Look, we supported Saddam Hussein's war against Iran. Our CIA provoked that war, supported Saddam. This was during the came to be during the time when George Herbert Walker Bush was head of CIA, and we thought that we would create some great instability and just let those guys all kill each other, and it was horrible. Go look at the death toll in that. Well, we greatly increased the power of Saddam Hussein, and then he invades Kuwait. We run him out. Then we want him. Netanyahu wants him out, and now basically Iran controls not Iran proper, but the Shia political influence of Iran controls. All the Christians have been run out. It was Iraq was originally a heavily minority Christian country, 15 to 20% Christian. That's all been run out. Huge ancient Old Testament sites. This is where Nineveh was, where Jonah went, and all that's been destroyed under this Netanyahu supported war that we went and waged in Iraq, and it's been a disaster after disaster after disaster, and Iran just has said, look, we're going to keep enriching our uranium until we get sanctions removed. We don't want nuclear weapons, but we've got to have some level. We've got to have some deck of cards to play against the hand we've been given. And so I can't blame them. Do I think the Ayatollahs are crazy from my perspective? Are they anti-Christian and anti-Jewish? Yeah. We've been no small part in assisting them to be even more radicalized. I'm not blaming the U.S. I'm not blaming Israel for their incredible anti-Christian and anti-Jewish stance. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But we've done nothing to help. And I've talked for way too long. There's the history lesson of what's gone on in that area.
There's so many threads to pull in there because, like you mentioned, the biblical history and the biblical text is rich with, even even the location of the garden and Eden and the rivers mentioned in Genesis, from the wise men that came from the east. I mean, all
Yeah.
of this is very much wrapped up in the history. Now, as far as the modern history goes, I've watched this. I'm younger than you, but I've watched these kind of endless wars where we've sent young men over there, put boots on the ground. Many have died. Not as many as in World War II, but many have died. Some people I know, some family friends have died over there, and so it's hard to at this point be energized by any kind of effort to go over there. One question I did have, and this was the area of disagreement I mentioned earlier, or perhaps an area of disagreement, maybe it's not. But when I hear the Ayatollah or others from a Muslim perspective, kind of offer these sentiments. On the one hand, they're chanting in whatever their government buildings are, "Death to America." And on the other hand, they're saying, "No, no, no, we don't want nuclear arms." My general instinct, and this comes from my background in being a missionary to Muslims and a Muslim dictatorship, is that Muslims, part of their kind of religion is it's totally permissible to lie to infidels from their
Hmm.
perspective. And so I don't trust anything they say. At the same time, they're humans, so you kind of have to learn to work with them. And so, why should we believe when he says we just want to do enrichment of uranium for nuclear energy? We don't want a nuclear weapon. Why would we even believe them? Why would we not trust maybe the Israeli intelligence who suggests that, and I guess they've been suggesting this for years. I don't know. They've been suggesting that Iran is like 2 weeks away from developing a nuclear weapon. It seems
2003,
what's the first instance?
2003, Netanyahu said that.
Okay,
So, I mean,
it's
and
been
it
going
may
on
be
for a while.
true.
Yeah,
It may be true, but Iran is a signatory to the IAEA's additional protocol for inspections. This is so, uh, you know, to me, a person who doesn't like seeing, a bunch of dead people. Do you think the average Persian, Iranian, sitting in the suburb of Tehran who's going to his engineering job or his whatever his job is? I mean, they're just people. Do they did do you think they have any say in any of this?
no,
No, they don't have any say. But we're just gonna. I mean, the Israelis have already bombed their sewage and water systems in
I saw that.
Tehran.
Yeah,
It's a disaster. And what are those guys suffering for? What have they done? I just don't understand it from a modern Jewish perspective. I can't speak for those people. Modern Judaism, in my mind, has nothing to do with Old Covenant temple worship. So, I mean, it's some new thing that Look, I think peacefully coexist with Japanese who are, for the most part, Shinto Buddhist. We can coexist with, Dearborn, Michigan is mostly Muslim. We've learned to coexist with all these groups inside and outside our borders. We can coexist with, but we as Americans are at least by heritage, we are Trinitarians. We are Christians. We're vast majority Protestant Christians. But I think the most conservative Catholics would lock arms and I'm less informed about where the Orthodox are on this. But uh, the under Western Christianity, so Protestantism and Catholicism, we hold to Augustine's just war understanding and dehumanizing dehumanization, where you basically are denying the image bearing status of another people group, um, is sinful and wrong, and has been considered that for a very, very long time. We are not given Joshua's edict to go and ethnic cleanse. That was a very unique situation. We're not given that, and maybe the modern Jews think that that's their edict, but it is not ours.
Sure.
And participating that in that, I think, is just demonstrably not just wrong, but sinful and criminal.
Right.
Um,
I think the counter could be because I mean, this is the irony, Ron, is like, we're willing to whatever extent, and it's still, and I don't fault our, political leaders for this. It's murky our involvement. We could speculate on that. We could, I'm sure, cite some sources that would indicate, bombers and tankers over Europe mobilizing and aircraft carriers moving into position. Um, we have people in our own country that are
we've
sympathetic.
participated. We've
Yeah,
participated.
we've participated. Ted Cruz said that in the interview, I believe, with Tucker. But my thing is, we have our own problems here. Like we have people in America that want death to America. We have people
Well,
that are radicals
absolutely.
here and sympathetic to the Iranian regime, and they don't want the West to succeed. And shouldn't we focus our efforts more on cleaning up our own home rather than participating in regime change abroad? I mean, I think that's a pretty like demonstrably, especially with the riots, most recently in the last few years, like at Colombia and other places, after the October 7th attack on Israel, there was a very disturbing amount of sympathy, and not from a Christian, like you mentioned, a Christian humanitarian perspective for um, those both Christians in Palestine, but also just people in Palestine who are getting decimated by a retaliatory attack. That's a different perspective. I'm talking
Hmm.
about, these chants, from the river to the sea, all this kind of stuff. This is happening in America, and I would think it to be more prudent for us to invest many of our efforts into doing whatever we can to address that issue here, rather than, dropping participating in a variety of ways in helping Israel attack Iran. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I just want to go back and and close the circle on
Yeah.
Iran proper. Do I think they are trustworthy? No, I don't think we're trustworthy. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Is do you want to increase trustworthiness and peace? And I'm no pacifist. I mean, if you've read, I mean, uh, you get finished with this, go read my 4-part series on why I think the way I do over at American Mind. I wrote a 4-part series on the changes in geopolitics and why it's a mistake. The last 2 articles are why I think it's a mistake to attack Iran, and then answering some objections by some Jewish Americans they raised to the article, and it was a great exchange. And I have, by the way, I have theological disagreements with modern Judaism. I have theological disagreements with modern Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and all these things. But I still love these people because why? Because they're made in God's image. That's why. Not because I think there's some, you know, prophecy that God's waiting on pins and needles for us to help enact. That is a very low, kind of a very low view of God's sovereignty. Anyway, but with regards to Iran, no, I don't think that they are trustworthy. As Reagan and Bush Senior and I think even Clinton said, trust but verify. We have, look, in our in the part of the start, and I know we're getting in the weeds, so I'll keep it real high level, hopefully, but that we agree to certain nuclear treaties or have in the past. And for instance, we have the technology, but we don't have multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles on the top of our ICBMs. Those are called MIRVs, MIRVs. You can look that up. It's amazing technology. By the way, I studied mutually assured destruction and game theory in college. This was my college thesis class. So I'm not trying to flex here, but I do know a little bit of what I'm talking about. And this is long, this isn't something I was just an internet bro on. I've been studying this for a long time. So anyway, studied anti-ballistic missile treaties. This is arcane stuff. But we don't have. Matter of fact, even our boomers, our missile our missile subs. So we have basically two kinds of submarines. We have attack subs, traditionally the Los Angeles class, but also the Virginia class. And then we have boomers, which are missile carrying subs, and those are mostly the Ohio class. Our Ohio class is can't carry MIRVs, and it can only fill up so many of its missile tubes, and that is subject to inspection. As a matter of fact, the reason, and this is what's so awful about the CIA, because they were incredibly destabilizing in how they helped Ukraine go attack these Russian bombers. And I know many are going, hey, isn't it great we attack Russian bombers? The Russian bombers were on the tarmac, displayed the way they were, so they can be seen by the spy satellites as part of the old START treaty that they still hold to, even though we left that treaty. And we display, so it was a good faith measure by Putin to put these bombers out on display so that everybody knows where they are, because that's part of their what's called the nuclear triad. Anyway, point being is we submit to certain treaties, and that is subject to inspection, and that is what Iran has offered to do. We are subject to inspection. Now, if what we're saying is the inspection regime isn't worth it, then all bets are off.
Right.
My argument is MAD works. What is MAD? That's mutually assured destruction. That is, if we shoot, we're going to get shot.
Right.
Because the time it takes for those birds to go, 30 minutes to wherever they're going to go is enough time for them to launch their deal. And plus, they've got bombers and subs. And I don't have a problem. And everybody's going to go, oh my gosh, I don't have a problem with a nuclear armed Iran. I just don't. They don't have intercontinental technology, and that's easy to inspect. You need very expensive, very out in the open launch systems for that. And look, Israel's the only country over there in the Middle East that has nukes. Everybody else has said we don't want them, including Iran. But it's made them kind of the bully in the area, and you may be okay with that. But I'm not okay with the way it's played out. I'm not okay with, all the chaos that has ensued in the last 30 years in the Middle East because of this. I want the safety of Israel. I want the safety of all those folks. But the current system has led to nothing but death, suffering, chaos, and America being subject to both here and abroad terrorist attacks, anti-Americanism, and so on and so forth, because we're seen as, the bulldog that Netanyahu's got the leash to. And I'm not okay with that. I think that's bad foreign policy. All right, again, let you talk.
That's fine. So let's focus on that, because I think that's a good place to go to is, I'm open to multiple options. I'm a plan truster in terms of I believe that Donald Trump does want peace and doesn't want endless wars. I'm willing to concede there may be a prudential way we could or even should be involved, not necessarily from a biblical historical perspective, but from a geopolitical perspective. I can be convinced of that. I can also not be convinced of that. Game theory it out, though. If America chooses not to back Israel, and they, I think steel manning their perspective would be that Israel is attacking, whether it's a true or false pretense, because they don't believe Iran. They think they're 2 weeks away from developing nuclear arms, but at the same time, Iran has been funding
the longest 2 weeks in history.
Yeah. At the same time, Iran has been funding Hezbollah, Hamas, these other
Absolutely.
entities that have been attacking Israel. So there could be prudential reasons apart from the nuclear stuff that Israel would
Uh-huh.
say it's in our best interest to attack. But game theory it out if Trump and Hegseth and all these guys say we're not going to back this. We're not even going to
Mm-hmm.
send, which we already have, in some material fashion. We've been assisting. I don't know exactly what that is. I would assume it's much like Ukraine, where we're providing certain technologies and insights and targeting that may be useful to Israel. But if we said we're not going to get any more involved than we already are, does
Right.
Israel have the capacity to finish the job?
I don't care. I just don't. It's their if they want to go attack, but let them deal with the consequences of being it's seven. Look, they're either part of the West and the Western civilizational project, which is the which is the philosophical remnants of Christendom, or they're not.
Sure.
If they're part of the West, we lead the West. For better or worse, this is what the West has. It's the United States. Okay? So we need to do what's best for the United States and then help protect it. I have no problem with Israel being fortified, defensive, but there's 7 million people, okay? In how many people? Let's ask the question that Ted Cruz couldn't answer. How many people are in Iran? You know, 80
million?
million?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Yeah, you and I can answer that question, but Ted couldn't. It was shameful. And Ted's not a stupid guy. I knew Ted a little bit before he became senator. This is not a dumb man. This is just shameful. And he's better than whoever would run against him. I get that. I want the best for Ted and his family. I don't wish ill, but that was shameful. It really was. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch the thing with Tucker. But look, it's Israel is 7 to 8 million people, give or take. They've just killed a ton of folks and leveled Gaza. Okay? Ethnic cleansing, not ethnic cleansing. Look, again, it's their deal, but it doesn't look good. Gaza looks like the moon now. Well, it looks like a combination of the moon and Dresden circa 1945. Okay? And you're either okay with that. By the way, one of the oldest Christian churches in the world was destroyed in that bombing. Okay? Are you Hamas? Bad deal. Okay? Really bad. But there's no easy answers. I just don't understand why it's our fight. Everybody goes, well, Israel's our greatest ally. Israel's not an ally. They are not. Egypt's an ally. You can question the wisdom of this.
Yeah.
Turkey's part of NATO. Israel is not an ally. I don't know
Yes.
what Israel is.
Sure.
They're the only country, and Great Britain gets away with this a little bit, whose people do not have to register under FARA. What's FARA? The Foreign Agent Registration Act. They're the only country. Why is that? Why? They have the same population as Togo, that huge geopolitical powerhouse. Look, again, I'll tell you who's been a faithful friend to us, and didn't attack one of our naval boats in the late 60s. Jordan. Are you for the peace of Jordan? How'd you like to be the Alawites right now in Jordan with these missiles flying over all the time going, what did we do?
Right.
Again, I don't want the suffering of Israelis. I don't want the suffering of anybody. None of them are Christian. The only Christian group and again, I'm not pro-Palestinian, but the group with the largest number of Christians has just been wiped out by Israel, and that was the Palestinians. Now, were they always reflecting what, as evangelicals, what we would consider good and right Christian doctrine and praxis? Absolutely not. But the Palestinian Christian, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, Yasser Arafat's group, uh, uh, Arafat was a Christian. So we have to understand where are our loyalties. And it's a mess. There are no clear loyalties. So it's
So,
Israel's fight. And again, I'm not saying this, Matt Walsh said, I don't care, I'm an American chauvinist. And that's a funny line. I really did chuckle at that when he said that. I thought
sure.
that was a really good line. I'm not really coming at it. We have interests over there. I don't know that this is it. In other words, I think our interest is much more along the lines of how can we help the Palestinians and the Jews live peacefully together?
Yep.
How can we help the Persian people be prosperous enough to kind of laugh their ayatollahs out of existence? I'll tell you what, normally causing great suffering is not how you remove a radicalized leadership. That's normally how you strengthen a radicalized leadership. Prosperity tends to moderate most people, sometimes too much. Our American prosperity has moderated Christianity to the curb in some ways. So anyway, I don't mean to sound callous, but I think our concerns are much more along the lines of what the negotiators we sent over, Witkoff and Anton, Witkoff, the chief negotiator, and Michael Anton, who's a stud, by the way. Go read his stuff. Absolutely fantastic. Anton was the technical negotiator because you have the framework, and that's what the chief negotiator does. And then you have the technical stuff. That's what those two guys were very faithful. And we left them hanging out to dry. And that's bad. But anyway, that's my opinion on all this.
So two questions in. One, I want to circle back on two things you mentioned. I actually hold, and I want you to convince me otherwise. I actually hold, in my circles at least, a contrary opinion, not on Palestine. I'm using reason by way of analogy here, but what we did in Japan, we counted the cost and we said, we're going to nuke these two cities. A lot of my friends, I would say most of my friends at this point, viewed this as bad, that we shouldn't have done that. They'll use Christian kind of Augustinian reasoning. I'm actually more sympathetic to our actions to prevent greater loss if we were to invade Japan. And listeners will understand. I'm not arguing for ethnic cleansing or anything like that. I'm trying to say, look, what Israel has done in Gaza, you could go listen to Martyr Made, you could go listen to kind of neocons, you could listen to anybody you want on the justification for that. And you could go back to the bombing of Dresden. And this has happened throughout centuries of not just Christian history, but history. This is what nations do.
About to make me take my jacket off, Chase. About to getting a little sweaty. Getting a little sweaty. About to have to take the jacket off. The button. Okay, we're going to start with the button. All right. Keep going. Keep going.
I want to understand, like, with our atomic bomb being dropped on Japan, it would seem that we don't have a great moral standing, at least, to criticize these other nations who engage in similar actions. Now, whether you agree with the actions of the bombing of Japan, or whether you agree with what's happening in many other places, that's one issue. But maybe let's focus on why we. I don't know if it's helpful to talk about the atomic bombs being dropped first or something else, but I think you know what I'm trying to get at here.
Oh yeah,
is
absolutely.
Because I've questioned.
No, I think you make a great point.
Okay,
I really do.
I've the just war theory is compelling and all, but what happens when your enemies don't abide by just war theory?
Well, I mean, it was Augustine, and we're the whole Reformation thing was Augustinian movement. So
Well,
I mean,
and you mentioned at the top of the podcast we should mature in our theology over time. So maybe we should
okay.
develop.
Yeah, I think it. And again, I'm no pet. This is I'm anti Bonhoeffer. Okay, I'm
Right.
more Schmittian, and you'll get
Oh,
letter.
boy.
Send your cards and letters to Chase
No,
Davis.
send them to Ron.
At he's quoting carlschmidt.com. No, so all right. First of all, does the United States have a lack of moral authority? I would say yes, but way before you ever get back to the bombing in Japan, and this is why we sent negotiators scheduled to sign treaties last Sunday, and we not only allowed, but do you think Bibi Netanyahu is okaying the operations that went on without U.S. coordination and help? Or at least saying, hey, we'll run to the rescue if things go sideways? It's just not happening. It's not. It's not. And if it did, it's like people who say, oh, Ukraine acted unilaterally and they're taking out of a large number of Russia's nuclear triad in their bombing force. They did that independently. Yeah. Okay. I've got I've got this piece of land out here to sell you. See this building? I got it for sale. Today, only $5,000. Okay. I take Bitcoin. All right. So we've lost our moral authority because Trump went on social media and said, yeah, we really duped those Iranians by doing all this negotiating. And then we attacked them. Terrible. And listen, here's why I'm pro-Trump. And I hope this is where Christians are. I'm pro-Trump because he doesn't hate me. Okay? Like everybody else does, including most with an R beside their name. Okay? I'm not talking about the truly Christian paleo-conservative right. I'm talking about the political leadership, what Yarvin calls the cathedral. They hate you. Trump simply doesn't hate me. That's why I support him. Not because I think he's right on everything, not because I think he's necessarily one of us. I think J.D. Vance may be. But I simply support Trump because he doesn't want my way of life to go away. Period. Okay? So I can, with great intellectual vigor, say I just disagree and find moral failing with Trump on these things, because that's not the basis of my support of him. And those of you, and I know some of you are listening because you have a faithful pastor or like the way Chase talks and you're good folks, but you want somebody to be your champion. And hey, I want that too. And guess what? He's enthroned in heaven. You have a champion. And if I were your president, I would fail you too. Okay? But let's get to, you brought up some interesting things about Dresden. You didn't mention Tokyo, and then Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'll give you my, I'll just first of all hit you with a hypothetical. Let's say a Hispanic group that is mostly illegal, maybe some legal residents in Boulder. Wait a minute, how far? Where exactly is your church? Are y'all in Boulder? Yeah, it's in Boulder, right? Know that you're kind of you're a very conservative church, right-leaning, and they decide during a worship service they've rigged explosives and they do an attack on your worship service and people die. What would you call that? An act of, starts
terror.
with a T?
Terror.
It's an act of terror. Why is it an act of terror? Because you're not bombing the people who are uniformed or have responsibility for whatever the policies are. You're just taking out civvies, right? Am I saying right? So
yeah.
We go and we firebomb Dresden. Is that an act of war or is it an act of terror? Oh, suddenly all your rubrics fall apart.
Right.
Okay. So by definition, the Nazi regime was fascist, correct?
Yeah.
So did the average, did, Karl Reinhold have any say in what was going on, who lived in East Germany in Dresden, have any say in what was going on?
Probably not.
Probably not. Is he just trying to feed his family? And did we barbecue him?
Right.
We absolutely did. Okay. And you can say the decision was made that in order to remove the will, the will to fight, we had to do that. I
Sure.
just think that's total BS.
Okay.
I don't think that's a legitimate way to fight war.
Okay.
Again, now we go to Tokyo. Curtis LeMay, and he was Baptist. I have a hard time having any assurance of Curtis LeMay's salvation. Sorry, that's just where I am, because he authorized the literal barbecuing of, the way that we basically napalmed Tokyo. There was created a firestorm.
Yep.
The pilots of our planes were getting sick with the smell of burning human flesh.
Jeez.
At least 1 million people, men, women, and children, complete indiscriminate, not a military target. We did that. Japan was at its knees. So we get to the point of the end of the Japanese war. They're blockaded. They don't have any access to raw materials. They've got no access to anything. They're not going anywhere. It's very similar to Iran. They're not going. Could they maybe cause some pain here and there? Maybe. Occasionally, but there was no reason that we were ever going to have to invade Japan. The only reason would be if we were asking for this thing that is completely ahistoric in the West's the West, and I mean the Christian West, fighting of war. This thing called unconditional surrender. Never would Christian nations ever ask for you fought until the other side was to a point where you could negotiate peace. The purpose of war is to fight until the good guys, hopefully, can negotiate peace. Unconditional surrender means you're just going to fight to the last man. And that's just not Christian. Never, ever has it been Christian. It's pagan. It's Nietzsche's view of war. It's the Homeric view of war. It's the Roman legion's view of war. Guess what? They didn't serve Christ. Curtis LeMay served Christ. So we bomb Hiroshima. Hiroshima wasn't a military target. We could have easily bombed their remaining warships. Doc, we could have dropped a demonstration nuke in Tokyo Harbor. Might have killed a few people, not very many, but it would have made a very big splash. Thank you. I workshopped that one. We could have dropped it on the top of Mount Fuji as a sign, their national symbol of pride. That would have been legitimate. But instead, and then we picked Nagasaki. And you know what the aim point for the bomb in Nagasaki was? The largest church in all of Asia. Now, it was Catholic, and LeMay was pretty famously anti-Catholic, but it was the largest church in all of Asia. That's the aim point. That's ground zero for the bombing of Nagasaki. Now, you can either say, mistakes were made or whatever. You can just call it what it is. Evil. All the generals, including Dwight David Eisenhower, who came to faith, before he even came to faith, which happened in the early part of his presidency, he was the one who added under God to our Pledge of Allegiance, said that the use of the atomic bomb was a mistake. It was unneeded. It was unnecessary. But it was, if we wanted to use the atomic bomb, why not use it against the communist Chinese in the Korean War that were causing immense casualties and suffering,
Right.
and say, no more. We will not take this atheist, this awful uh, and instead we allowed Mao to basically have a face-saving armistice. Well, not even an armistice, a ceasefire that's still, that war never ended. We have a demilitarized zone, and then he proceeds to kill how many, 20 to 50 million of his own people.
Right.
You know, struggle set. And so I just think I think all of that was an incredible mistake. These were fights lost. Going back to the German thing, we enabled. If the purpose of World War II in Europe was to keep a uh, a crackpot, terrible ruler from taking over half of Europe, we failed miserably,
Yeah. So
and we enabled it, and uh, it's by no accident that all of the death camps were found on the Soviet line of demarcation.
yeah.
The Soviets even fessed up. It took them until the 1990s that one of the death camps where a huge number of Polish Jews were killed was their doing.
Wow.
And again, this is not the Holocaust was absolutely real,
Right, right.
terrible, awful death. But we didn't make it any better. We even repurposed one of the death camps for holding German civilians, and a huge number died under our care.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think we've got some real moral problems.
Well, even if you look in our own history, we have Sherman's March to the Sea. And as far as I've been taught, which isn't always reliable, that was one of the first instances of total war in the West, where he went and just burned and that kind of
Just
thing.
burned
So
everything.
it's a complicated question. I don't know if you've convinced me. You've given me more moral and philosophical pause. I want to be a good Christian pastor and teach, and not just good Christian, but a good Christian man, and think about these things well, especially that, I have somewhat of a platform and I want to educate others. But it is something that lingers in my mind, because when you have a Christian West that's committed to just war, and you're
Mm-hmm.
facing an enemy that does not believe in just war, that is willing
Right.
to commit these horrible atrocities, it seems like a losing strategy. It seems like
Uh,
you will because they're not going to operate by your terms. Now,
Wait a
what
minute. Wait a minute,
what yeah, go
Chase.
ahead. Yeah.
So they're working. So have the Iranians directly attacked anyone?
Proxy, but to my
Proxy.
knowledge, I
So
don't
wait a
I
minute.
don't know.
So you're saying that we follow just war because we would never use proxies to attack people,
No,
right?
we've never done that.
Might want to look at your crane.
Or many other
And
examples. The other thing
many
you
other
mentioned that I
examples, the
wanted to
entire decolonization of Africa. And boy, how has that worked out for the Africans?
I know.
We've
With
basically given, hey, China, have Africa.
Yep, and that's what's happening
And
right
how's
now.
that working out for the Africans?
Right. The other thing I wanted to discuss that you mentioned, and because I think I don't know if it'll be upsetting for my viewers, but if it gets out there, it would be upsetting for many American evangelicals, is we've been taught that Israel is our greatest ally. Now, I want to steelman that because I have many Jewish friends, and I hope to make a trip to Israel. I'd like to go visit the
It's
sites,
the
all that kind of
best.
stuff. I think
It's
it'd be very,
unbelievable.
I think it'd be
One of
very
the
fun.
easily the most moving trip I've ever done.
Um,
It's just beautiful. The people are great. Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. What a trip. Highly encourage everyone, and the Jewish, the Israelis, uh, just tremendous hosts. We went into many Palestinian Christian areas. Those people were great too. Yeah, I mean, we're what amounts to tourists with money. Of course, they're going to
sure,
treat us well,
sure.
but it was unbelievable. Anyway, keep going.
So, I am definitely not, and I think we made it clear so far in the program, anti-Israel in any way. At the same
No,
time,
absolutely not.
how do we walk that line of kind of disentangling for Christians? And this is what I try to do in my article, disentangling um, the kind of myth, the theology around Israel being our greatest ally, and just kind of treating Israel like a partner in the region, just like we view Saudi Arabia, so that
Mm-hmm.
we can advocate. You know, they may have. I think Tucker brought this up in his interview uh, with Ted about, you know, you mentioned the foreign spies and that kind of thing. But regardless, you know, how should we appropriately engage the topic of Israel for evangelicals specifically, and kind of demythologize the kind of dispensational kind of centrality of Israel for the return of Christ, all this kind of stuff. What would be some helpful remarks you might have there?
Okay, so why let's just hit it, let's hit it two ways. Let's talk briefly, not get too theory cell about any of this stuff, but let's talk about the Bible first, and then geopolitically second.
Yeah,
And they're not, by the way, politics and theology and statecraft, all these things are intertwined, because you're going to serve, political theology is just a reality. You're going to serve whoever you think your God is, and
right,
you're going to become more like that God. uh, uh, I that's just that's a reality. So first of all, I would have your viewers, and again, I don't want you to agree with Ron. I want you to have the mind of Christ. Okay, and that may or may not be. I could be completely wrong. I know I'm wrong on some stuff, and as soon as I find out what that stuff is, I'll think something different, right?
right, yeah,
So I come at this seriously, hopefully with humility, but consider these things. Why was Paul why does Paul make the comments, and they're ignored in a lot of modern theology because the advance of liberalism that does away with the pastoral epistles and Ephesians. Okay? So Paul really deals with some of this stuff in that. Why does Paul make a big deal about the wall of hostility being broken down? Now, that's specifically mentioning a dividing wall in the temple complex that didn't allow Gentiles to come into where they were allowed in Torah to submit a free will offering or a
right,
peace offering.
right,
These were the sacrifices that any Gentile, they couldn't come in to the inner gate, but they could come into the temple, the outer courtyard, just like a Jew could, but they could submit either one of these two sacrifices. But this wall came up during the intertestamental period when Herod's temple is being built. This wall, we still have the inscription plaques from it that says, by penalty of death, no Gentile can cross this line. And Paul says that wall of hostility has been broken down. Why does he say that? Because everyone now has equal access into the sanctuary. This new sanctuary, it's not the temple, it's a new sanctuary. This is what he means when he says, therefore, there is neither Jew nor Greek, male or female. He's not saying that suddenly there's not men and women.
right,
We know that. He's not even saying that there's not men and women divided roles in the service of worship. He's saying all have equal access into the sanctuary. So you've got to regard that, because if so, that means what was the purpose of Judaism in the first place? They were the administrators of Yahweh's local presence and the receiving of Yahweh's edicts and prophecy, the word of God. If there is now no longer this wall of division and all have equal access, there's neither Jew nor Greek into the sanctuary, there's no purpose for Judaism. And this is why Paul makes such a big deal about the ending of circumcision. And he makes it clear, not just that Christians shouldn't be circumcised. He says that Jews who insist on circumcision, he wishes that they would go the whole way, that they would cut off the entire organ
right,
in their circumcision, that they may not reproduce. This is radical. This is Paul as prophet, as a Pharisee. This is Paul, who was trained by Gamaliel under the teachings of Philo in the great Pharisaic tradition, saying, being the prophet of the end of Judaism. And then Peter, who says, and Paul writes many things that are hard to understand, speaking of the book of Hebrews, I
right,
believe. But before that, he says in 1 Peter 2:9, he says, but now you are now a royal priesthood. In other words, kingly. The priesthood, this word Kohen, literally means house servant. So this royal priesthood, these are the people who are allowed into the king's house in order to serve. Like we would have the picture that is given in the old traditional British aristocracy of the house servants, the footman, the bellman, the head. This is the priesthood. Honestly, this is what the priesthood is, and the chief servant was the high priest, who got to go into the actual throne room once a year and commune with God himself. But he had to do so. He had to burn incense and do all these things, but take off his outer garments of glory and be humble and all this stuff. Pretty cool. But now that's us. We now, all of us, can go in as priests. We are royal, but he doesn't leave it there. What does he say right after that? You are now a royal priesthood and a holy nation. In other words, now serving Christ, that's the royal of the royal priesthood. You are also this holy. Holy means set apart, separate from righteous. Righteousness is covenantal living. It's the two-way working between God and man. A holy nation, a set apart, a actual people, but no longer a genos, a race. Circumcision has been done away. You are now an ethnos, a nation, a people who are, what's an ethnos? Genos is a marker. So circumcision was this obvious racial marker that was outward, like skin color or eye shape or hair color or all these things that mark the races of man. That was passing away. But the ethnos, this ethnos that was kind of above and over all these other ethnic groups that would be brought in. This is the miracle of Pentecost. God didn't do away with all the different languages. He made a miracle so that his prophecies would be heard in all the different ones and then brought in anyway. So Peter says, you are now this set apart nation, this set apart ethnos. And you have to just wrestle with, why did Paul and Peter both mention towards the end of the giving of the New Testament, the end of this 40-year time period, and then the destruction of the temple and all? Not that people wouldn't still call themselves Jews and all that. Paul says there's people who still follow Zoroastrianism and people who follow Buddhism and people who follow, but the people of God is now no longer demarcated by this wall of hostility, by this limitation of drawing near, this limitation of race. And you just have to wrestle with that. And I can't, that's how I would encourage your people what I would encourage your people to ponder.
Yeah. Okay. So then the last thing was, geopolitically speaking, for the many, many politicians and pundits who, promote this, especially, I mean, Ted is I've mentioned him multiple times, I'm sorry, but he's just the quintessential example of what I've seen for the last, I'm almost 40, so 40 years of Republicans.
Such an old man. I can barely remember 40.
They keep saying Israel is our greatest ally, and they don't just mean that geopolitically. They're using spiritual language to try to goad Americans into certain political ends. I view that as improper, let's say, and I don't view it as helpful. At the same time, I want to honor the history we have as Americans and the heritage that we have in America, and how I'm very sympathetic to the average pew sitter who's just going, well, that's what I've been told. That's what I've been even taught in the pulpit, that, geopolitically, at least, Israel's our greatest ally. And I'm not trying to debunk or cast Israel in a negative light. We've already spoken positively of Israel, and it's their fight and
100%,
that kind of stuff. But at the same time, what's a more fitting way to think of them from your perspective geopolitically? What would be a more helpful way to articulate if Ted were to call you today and you'd be like, hey, Ron, I messed up. I shouldn't have said what I said. What would be a more fitting way for our leadership to speak of Israel's relationship to the United States?
Well, I would start with trying to convince them, and again, very graciously, that these are. Well, I'll back away from that because that might be taken as inflammatory, and I really don't mean it as that because I have great respect. These are very talented, capable I mean, some of my abs. I mean, go look at some of the best music and movies and art and this is this is a this is a very capable, gifted people. I want them to, you know, I want them on our team. I want them to submit to Christ, but that's between them and the Lord. I can only say, but what I would say to Ted is that, look, the lever to pull on here is, are they going to be partners in the West's civilizational project?
Yeah,
And you've got, and the problem is that I feel like at times the modern nation of Israel, which has no, in my opinion, no cultic tie to old covenant temple worship,
sure.
it's just a different thing. But modern Israel doesn't hold to that Western Augustinian tradition of you should live. The country that does most faithfully is Switzerland. Switzerland says, hey, you guys do what you're going to do. You want our opinion? We'll ask. Matter of fact, we'll even help. We're going to send our boys to guard the Vatican. We're not really a Catholic. We're partially Catholic, but we want peace. You want, but we're staying out of your mess.
Right.
We want peace, and we so want peace. Not that got a good military. You want to mess with the Swiss? I don't. I think they still have the law that every
Yeah.
able-bodied male has to have a military, both handgun and rifle.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mess with the Swiss. That'd be a hard country to take.
Right.
But and you either agree with that view or not. That is the way to conduct. They are not peaceniks, traditionally at least. I don't know their current. They are the most radically democratic country in the world. They have a canton system. And they can do that because they don't invite the world to live in their borders.
Right,
So they
yeah.
are generally presuppositionally homogeneous. Everyone who immigrates has to apply to their local canton for him. It took Tina Turner, who's this, artist that immigrated. She married a Swiss guy, and she was there for 25 years, I think, before her canton allowed her to get Swiss. She needed to learn German and French, I believe. There's 4 languages: German, Swiss, Italian, and they have some weird version of Italian that I can't remember right now. But so you either think that that's kind of the general way to do Christian foreign policy. It's what George Washington believed.
Right.
His farewell address said, hey, try to get along with everybody. Don't have a bunch of treaties. Don't do this. But we view ourselves as the world hegemon.
Right.
And that's okay. But the Bible talks about build up your walls. It condemns offensive. Solomon got in real trouble when he loaded up with chariots and horsemen, because that's offensive weaponry. God said, build up the walls. And so that's kind of how I'd tell Ted, help the Israelis want help with technology. I don't think they do need help technologically. They're pretty advanced on their own. Some of their modifications they've done to, for instance, the F-16 is more advanced than our stuff.
Right.
And their F-15s. I don't know what they're doing with the F-35s. I don't have, a lot of look into that program. But they're very capable people, but their defensive weaponry, help them out. And then people will run, why do you think that Iran should possibly have a nuclear capability if you think that that defensive weaponry is what people should have. I view mutually assured destruction as the ultimate defensive weapon,
Okay.
because and that's just how I see it fitting. So that's how I would encourage Ted. I would be like, I would help the make Iran very difficult to attack, make everybody very difficult to attack, and let each people determine their own thing.
Sure.
I think Israel, I'm not a Jew, but I think I have no problem with those 7 million people having their own way of life in their land, being able to do their thing. Amen.
Right.
Great.
Yep.
I wish they'd convert to Jesus. I think it'd be better for them if that was in a Christian administrated land, like back in the old days.
Sure.
That we tried, but absolutely, Jews could figure out your own deal, and the same for the Turks, and the same for the Arabians, and the same for all these people. The Yemenis, hey, just don't block up the canal there. Y'all want to be backward, whatever you are, fine. Just don't attack anybody.
Right.
That's how I would encourage Ted, but
That's great. That's great. And I think there are some in Israel, like Yoram Hazony, who advocate for a Western
100%.
civilization project. But it does get incredibly complicated, as we've spent over an hour discussing. These things are incredibly complicated. And it's really important for me, personally to me, because I grew up in kind of the dispensational waters of Dallas with DTS and all this stuff.
As did I.
And I want Christians to be able to think charitably. I want us to be able to discuss these things. I think we've done that on this episode. And I want us to disentangle, to differentiate and categorize, hopefully, geopolitics, theology, biblical interpretation, so that we don't get manipulated. And that's what I don't want for people, is this spiritual manipulation when politicians get out there and, talk about, parrot these lines that to a lot of God-fearing Americans, they believe. And I think it's unfortunate they believe them, not because of the geopolitical implications necessarily, but because it actually does harm to our faith and our witness in the world. If we are going to aspire to be a Christian nation, I think we should do so with prudence and with intelligence, and the ability to distinguish between categories, and not universalize this dispensational, left behind kind of these mantras that we've been taught. And so I think we've tried to do that on the episode. If you're a listener and you disagree, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. Ron, any parting shots from you?
Yeah. The last thing I want to say is that this mantra of we have all these enemies around the world, traditionally an enemy, a public enemy, and this is biblical theology. Great theologians have talked about this is one who can call into question your way of life. In other words, an enemy is an existential threat. Okay? The U.S. has no enemies. It has one rival, that being China, who's a real pain in the backside, who needs to be countered. They're overfishing the South American they're overfishing the oceans, and they're not playing nice in the sandbox about some things. I thought Trump's tariffs were we talked about that before, were a great counter to that. But the U.S. doesn't have any enemies. Iran's not a threat to the United States. It's just not. They're a concern, but there exists North Korea is not the United States enemy. It's a concern. We have one rival, no enemies. We have a lot of confused people.
Yeah.
And I would just end with that encouragement.
That's great. Well, Ron, thank you so much for giving of your time. For listeners, I hope this was helpful. Ron, if people want to keep up with your work, I want to make sure to plug the articles. I'll put a link to those in the show notes. Did you say at the American Mind you wrote those?
Yeah, I have a series at the American Mind. I've got another article coming out in the next couple of weeks there that has nothing to do with any of this. It has to do with the fiscal issue of the fiscal overhang that's coming, and buying people out of their, possibly contracting to buy people out of their future obligations with the federal government. Look forward to that. But yeah, the American Mind, I've got a 4-part series on geopolitics. I write pretty often for American Reformer, I love those guys. Not only read those guys, but support them. The work of Josh Abatoy and Nate Fisher, two of my dear, dear friends. And then I'm The Eyes of Achilles, Ron Dodson Substack. And then on Twitter, Ronald Dodson on Twitter. You can find me and come argue with me there if you
If you
want
dare.
to. No, I'm nice. I'm a sweetheart. I really do love people. And that's why so much of this just makes me shake my head. So,
Sure.
But hey, if y'all are listening to this, support Chase and support the work he does, because he is a faithful brother. Whether you think everything I've said is trash, the dude loves Jesus, loves his church, and loves the Big C church at large. And he is a faithful warrior for Jesus Christ. So support what he's doing.
Thanks so much, Ron. Well, thank
You
you
bet,
for
buddy.
joining me today, Ron. I really appreciate your time.
See you, man.
Thanks for tuning in today for my conversation with Ron Dodson. I hope it was helpful for you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to sign up on the Patreon so you can actually contact me. That's a great way to sign up, support the program. Click the link in the show notes. $5, $15 a month, get you swag, get you direct access, and we can have a conversation on there. Don't forget to check out the Substack, sign up on there as well so we can continue the conversation through written form. I'll provide all the places I'm getting interviewed or writing weekly on that as well. And to close out, just to remind you of a great product that I'm using called Ion Layer. Ion Layer is an NAD plus infusion that uses a medical grade patch that goes in your body. If you're wondering what all that means, it's a way to improve your life. This is a version of biohacking that's good for you. Your NAD plus levels decline over time, and so you need to get those back up to stay sharp mentally, recover physically. And so with Ion Layer, you can get those directly to your home under the care of a medical doctor, and you don't have to go get an IV, which is kind of nasty and really expensive. These are a fraction of the cost. If you use my link in the show notes, ionlayer.com, use code FPT, and you can get $100 off your first kit. Like I said, it's a no-brainer if you're looking to supplement your NAD plus levels. These are huge right now. It's really important, especially for men. Go to ionlayer.com, use the link in the show notes, use code FPT to get $100 off your first kit. Well, thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.